Coming up on Theatre Talk.
Now we talk about the spectrum, don't we?
Now it's diagnosable.
You know, it's diagnosable. Maybe the greatest geniuses in music were on that spectrum in some way.
Now, do you think about things like that, Mark, when you prepare the role?
No, I just say the lines.
Theatre Talk is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation and the Honorable Thomas Mercer Ray.
When were you made a king?
I am not a king.
I'm afraid you are. We were both made kings, against our will, I suppose. You have a world of subjects, as do I. Mine were given to me by God. I wish I were a pagan.
Why?
Many gods are fun. One is a nightmare.
From New York City, this is Theatre Talk. I'm Susan Haskins, and I want to welcome my co-host, Warren Leight, writer, TV producer, and Tony winner for Sideman, his wonderful play about music and family. And I have invited Warren here today because we are discussing another wonderful play about music and family, Farinelli and the King. We are joined by its playwright, Claire van Kampen, and its star, Mark Rylance. Welcome, both of you, to Theatre Talk.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Claire, I want to ask you, what drew you to this story about Philippe V of Spain and his insomnia problems that led to his relationship with music?
Well, I was working as a composer, you know, for most of my life. And I was working on a piece with a couple of countertenors. It was a show we were doing. It was The Tempest, actually. Mark was playing Prospero. And in the tea break, one of them said to me, do you know this story about Farinelli? And I said, oh, I remember the film. I think it was in the 90s, yes, I saw that. And he said, I think you'd really love where the film stops. The story really begins. And I said, what story is this? And he said, well, how this very famous castrato went to sing to a king who was incredibly depressed, bipolar or something we don't quite know. But the sound of this man's voice restored the king out from his illness into a functionality again. But the castrato decided never to return to his life, and he was the most famous singer
He gave
in
up
the world.
his career.
He gave it all up to sing to one man.
And Mark, you play Philippe V of
Oh, yes,
Spain.
look at that.
It's
Of Spain.
an incredible likeness.
Oh, yeah. Marvelous.
Well, you have fun with the wig, which is quite fabulous. But,
What wig?
Yeah. But what's his problem?
What's his problem?
Yeah.
Oh, well, he's one of these children born with particular gifts that don't match the family that his soul has chosen to come in with. He really should be an inventor or a clocksmith or a mathematician.
Yeah.
Someone in a very academic community, I think, working in a very obsessive particular way. And at age 17, his grandfather, Louis XIV, the Sun King of France, sends him off to be King of Spain, and he can't cope at all with it. So he's just not happy at a very deep level with his fate.
So now they say, I mean, Wikipedia said to me, he's bipolar.
I don't know what the term
Me
means
neither,
exactly.
but that's what they said.
Yeah.
He's depressed a lot.
He
and
goes
can't-
up and down.
He can't sleep.
He can't sleep, and he retreats consciously or unconsciously into a fantasy life. And when he is functioning, he's very brilliant. He reforms the whole tax system of Spain, and we know from reports of the battles he takes part in that people fall around him. So he's not up on a hill watching. He's actually in the battle fighting. So he was a warrior and a mathematician, but he was not
Cut out.
not cut out to be king of Spain.
No, he was not born to be king. He was made to be king.
Right.
Finger was pointed at him at the age 17, and he was told to go off and rule Spain so that
Right.
France could keep hold of it, basically.
Yeah.
You know,
It's a family business.
it was
Family
kept, they
business,
kept it
yeah.
in the family.
And I always thought that diagnosis was a facile one. I think
Yes.
there's a lot more going on with him. And interestingly, So we meet him at the beginning of the play. Spoiler alert: he's trying to fish goldfish out of a bowl. It's a beautiful opening, beautifully visual and interesting, and tells us a lot right away. But we meet him there, I guess at one of his lower points in the depths of his despair. How does his wife decide music might be the cure? How does that happen?
Well, of course, it's a true story. And I have condensed some things, but in actual fact, the facts are that there were doctors in Seville at the time in Spain, and the King's doctors, who were working on a very primary kind of music therapy. They had moved out of the Middle Ages where, mental illness was thought to be possession, right, and you're inhabited by evil spirits. They had moved forward from that into the age of the Enlightenment. And they were beginning to think, well, what can help it? What can affect it rather than cure it? How can we help it? And music therapy was begun to be known in tiny forms in Europe. And these doctors travelled quite a bit, and they connected with each other. And I think they'd heard that Farinelli had actually sung to an aristocrat in England who was very melancholic, and it had an effect upon him. So I think the true story is that the Queen was informed by the King's doctors that might help. And she did go to England, and Farinelli returned with her. Or he came en route via Paris to Spain and never left.
And sang to him night after night, all night. He was a night owl, the King.
Yes.
Farinelli had to sing all night, and that became his life. You do this now. You have this wonderful singer, E.S. Dean Davies.
Well done.
Nicely done.
Just spectacular.
Yes.
But you've done this very interesting thing in the play, that he comes in and sings these wonderful arias, but then you have another man,
Sam Crane,
doing the speaking and doing the relationships, right?
Yeah.
So to speak. Why did you make that split choice?
Well, I think, when I was working on the play more and more, first you have a practical issue. If you're going to sing real operatic arias, you need a countertenor with at least a range where you can believe it is an extraordinary
Voice of a castrato.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, it's not exactly the voice of a castrato, but we can believe that it was close enough. So you have to have that. So you have to have someone trained to be able to do that. And that is not an actor's training, So that's that. And then most opera singers are not actors, so they don't have an actor's training. But it was really something else. When I began to look into the character, I felt that Farinelli, which in fact was not his name was Carlo Broschi, and he came from Puglia, the heel of Italy, and sort of via Naples was introduced to all the glory of Europe. Opera.
And you tell us about when he was 10?
Yes, well, when he was 10, he was unfortunately castrated by his brother.
A composer.
And so in a sense, Farinelli is a persona, a name that's created through sound, through performance. And Carlo is another part of his character. So they are actually two people, as is the king.
Yeah. Well, but you play two people, and then, boy, I don't want to go there. You play the king's two people, and then you play somebody else.
Yeah.
I don't.
But I think they connect somehow in that they both feel a certain space between their public persona and their private persona, that they both feel split. Somehow the music pulls them together.
I think splitting is a key word about this show. You talk a lot in psychology about people. At what age was someone split off from their true self?
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
And I think the king was split off very early on, and Farinelli was, when Farinelli's created, that's a surgical split, really.
Yes, it is.
So I liked the doubling, because it told us there really were there's two people for the king and two people for Farinelli as well, and it
Where
worked
did you
well.
get the thing of the king jumping naked into the fountain in Versailles at age 10?
Well, they all have true roots, these stories. He was shamed. He was a very sort of natural person. He was a person really more of our time than
Philippe,
that time,
yeah.
Philippe. And he was shamed, definitely, by the very strict kind of rules and behaviour of Versailles. Even though it was loose in a lot of ways, he broke all those sort of rules and he didn't fit in at all.
Right.
So, in a sense, he was always a misfit. And it was always uncomfortable for him. He spent a great deal of time on his own, mending clocks in his room as a boy, taking them all apart and putting them all back together again. It's phenomenal.
And you use
ability.
that in the play quite wonderfully. Yeah.
Yes.
And you also talk about the math. There's a mathematical quality to that, and there's
Yes.
a mathematical aspect to music. And you talk about
Yes, absolutely. About harmonics.
the harmonics.
Yes, and the music of the spheres.
I found that fascinating.
Oh, good, I'm glad.
The king is hearing the harmonics that maybe others don't hear.
That notes the vibrations at a certain number of beats per second. So you can name them with a numerical figure, can't you?
You can. We are at root a series of numbers, the ancients believed, and it's coming more into our consciousness that actually sound can heal or hurt us. We know that, don't we?
Yeah.
We know that it can have an incredibly bad effect if we listen in a rock concert to the effect of the vibrations on our gut, and how powerful they are. But it can also heal us as well.
You know, Warren's play, I will go back to Sideman, about his family and his father, the jazz musician, and he really, not to tell you about your play, but in your play you have so much that's the world that he escapes in.
It's an open question, and I wonder, there's everything else for a musician, sometimes the line, everything else is just waiting. And and not very interactive with the world in his own head, but when the music's on, completely in touch with everything around.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's an interesting quality that a lot of the great musicians have, a sort of ability to disappear into that.
I think that's
Yeah.
so true, and we think possibly Mozart had that, and whether that's we talk about the spectrum, don't we?
Now it's
Maybe,
diagnosable.
You know, it's diagnosable. He's on the spectrum. He's deeply on the spectrum. All of that stuff. But maybe the greatest geniuses in music were on that spectrum in some way. But
You think Philippe might have been?
Oh, I think he was.
Yes.
I think we would consider him to be, with the way we diagnose at the moment.
Now, do you
today.
think about things like that, Mark, when you prepare the role?
No, I just say the line.
God bless you.
I just figure out,
And
try and figure out why
and drive the boat as you do.
Drive the boat.
Drive the boat.
We see the music healing the king and bringing back his life force. What's in it? Why does Farinelli stay?
Isn't that an interesting question? Because that is the thing I'm asked most. Not how did the music work, because I think we all innately know when music soothes us or makes us feel better or makes us feel very emotional. We have a relationship to that. But why would you give up a whole world that you're a massive star in to compare it? I mean, it was equivalent to sort of Michael Jackson at the height of his fame, really. Why would you turn your back on that and just sing to one person, probably at the most inconvenient hours? You've got out of bed at 3 a.m, you know, please sing me 6 arias.
And then at one point, you have the king decides they're all going to live in the forest. And one can imagine that back then, when does the play start? What year?
1737.
Yes. You would think the forest could be awfully isolated.
It is.
At night.
It is isolated. In actual fact, he did build. It wasn't a little house in the forest. He did build
Right.
a big house in the forest.
He's a
It
king.
was in the forest, and that is where he's buried.
Really? in that
Yes.
forest.
Yes.
Well, he's saying to his wife, "You can cook," and his wife is going.
But you know,
She's never dressed herself.
his first wife did cook onion soup in their bedroom for him. French onion soup. She had a little kind of fire,
cooker.
little camp cooker in her bedroom, and cooked him onion soup because he could not eat any of the Spanish food. This is all true.
Did he speak Spanish?
No, no Spanish at all.
Excellent.
Only French.
And were they, as you have in the play, were they advisors conspiring to get rid of him?
Well, they're not conspiring to get rid of him. They have lost faith that he can cope and that can rule, and they're in a desperate situation, which is true, that war is advancing, war with Britain. There's all kinds of problems going on with the slave trade and the tussling over all of that with European countries at that point. So they need someone that can rule and can lead them into battle. Now, if he can't rule, then he has to step aside and let the air take over. But there's a religious and moral scruple about that. You can't just knock a king off his perch.
So they were now. But we only have a minute left. But I do want to go back to Iestyn Davies, and also there's another singer who's
James Hall.
Yes,
Yes.
doing some of the performances. But I saw Iestyn. And when did he come into the mix? Was he one of the people you met back then? I mean, what a remarkable find.
No, I didn't meet him back then, and I tell you how I heard about him. It's very mundane. I think I was vacuuming one of our rooms at home, and I'd got to polishing the furniture, and on the radio came this absolutely extraordinary sound. I stopped everything, turned off the vacuum cleaner, and
He cut through that.
he cut through the vacuum cleaner, and he was singing, I think he was singing Bach, actually. And it was just riveting. And I thought, who is that? And then I heard it was Iestyn Davies. And this was very early on in his career.
And so this was before your play was.
This is
come.
before I'd written my play, completed it, before I'd completed it. And I just thought, that's the voice I'm looking for. And I phoned him up. And at first he said, and of course the prospect of working with Mark, most people do want to have a go at that, you know. Yes, I would
Have
love
a
to
go.
have a go being on stage with Mark. And so he was intrigued, but he said, oh, no. He said, my voice is not like Farinelli's. Farinelli could sing 3 octaves, sing up very high. I said, but your voice has the effect that Farinelli's voice had. That's what I'm looking for. If it had that effect on me, it's going to have that effect on our audiences who will never hear a castrato.
Wonderful.
None of us ever will, I'm sure.
I hope.
I hope not.
Yes.
But our audiences, being theatre audiences, probably many of them have never been to an opera, let alone a Baroque opera, and let alone really have heard a countertenor sing, and certainly not one of the top countertenors in the world.
And you get the greatest hits of these old operas.
Yes.
You'd have to sit through about 36 hours of operas
Yes,
to
you
hear
would.
these 7 arias.
It's
But
magnificent.
they are they're so choice.
And they have a beat. I was tapping my
Yeah.
thought.
Yes, they do, yeah. They're
I mean,
wonderful.
Cara Sposa has that beautiful, there's such beautiful cellos and bass instruments in counterpoint to the high.
Yes,
high
it's
voice.
not
It's
foreign music to us, actually.
No,
For
it
some reason,
sounds familiar.
Well, Handel was a very theatrical composer.
Of course.
That felt like a Broadway orchestra, a beautiful.
They
Broadway-
did, didn't they? Yes.
It was a great
I'm
sound
so
to bring
glad
to
you
Broadway. You know,
Well, Juilliard's got this wonderful early music program, you know, now, but they
Yes.
don't have so many orchestras as we do in London, places to play, I think.
Yeah.
But the talent is remarkable.
The talent is
here.
remarkable. The amount of American young Baroque players
Yeah.
is quite remarkable. And I must say, I wish there were more ensembles they could then graduate and play in. So
It's beautiful. Farinelli and the King at the Belasco Theatre. It's magnificent.
and it's your first play?
yes, it is.
That's amazing.
Oh, that's
Thank
amazing.
you.
That's remarkable.
So,
Well
Warren,
done.
Tribute
Warren
from
Leight,
you.
thank you so much.
My pleasure. Very nice to meet you.
And
Thank
you.
you so much.
Thank you.
And now I'm here with Michael Musto, who went on a remote for us to interview 2 theater legends.
They are fantastic. Come on, try to remember. Susan, do you know who they are?
I do.
Funny. Hi, I'm Michael Musto from New Now Next, and I'm here with Tom Jones and Harvey Schmidt, who've written such legendary shows as The Fantasticks, I Do, and 110 in the Shade. And tonight you guys are getting the Oscar Hammerstein Lifetime Achievement Award from the York Theatre Company. Congrats. Do you think you deserve it? Because I do.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
No question in my mind. Yeah.
It's exciting.
What do you feel your contribution is to modern musical theater? I mean, everyone has a place like Sondheim and Kander and M. What is your place?
I think the primary thing is that exploring the form in its presentational aspects. That is to say, by not just depicting what is so-called reality, but admitting that you and the audience are in a space together, admitting that throughout, and that you're going to cooperate together to create something, so that you can have, not being realistic, you can have a narrator, which we almost always have, and you can have just very bits of scenery that the audience fills in the rest. And it's a concept, a very ancient concept, exploring what it's like to have the audience in a very ancient way sit and like be part of the creative process.
So what you're saying is you really don't believe in the fourth wall?
I don't. For one thing, the theater is linguistic. It's one of the, as opposed to film, for example, or television, or our world, which is almost all visual. It's one of the few last places where part of the magic can be done, certainly by music, but also by language. And that by not fourth wall and, oh, this is all real kind of thing, you can elevate the language. You can do like Shakespeare says, now entertain conjecture of a time when creeping murmurs and the pouring dark do fill the wide vessel of the universe. So that you get, now people don't talk like that, and you know, if you raise the fourth wall, but we know that the audience then once they accept these things, then they believe it.
Harvey, when you worked together and collaborated on shows, what was your dynamic? Did you sit down and say, well, we need a song here and need a song there? Did you have lyrics first and then the music?
We work all over the place, and there's no real pattern to a show. I mean, sometimes it's all music first, sometimes it's all words first, and then sometimes when we first started collaborating, we would work more closely, be in the same room at the same time. But we found that it works better for each of us to have islands when we're being separate and working on your element.
I was amazed to learn that you had actually conceived the Fantasticks as a large-scale Broadway-type musical. It was a huge, huge hit, let's face it, for many, many years off-Broadway. Why did it never move to Broadway?
It couldn't sustain the weight of a big Broadway production. It was fragile and intimate, very intimate. It only had 5 people, maybe 6 in the play. And that was one reason. So it didn't fit the form. And the other thing is, we didn't know enough yet to write a Broadway musical, in my opinion. We were just we had no training, and we had no intention, either of us, of writing or composing or doing that as a career. I wanted to be a director, and Harvey wanted to be, and was, an enormously successful, one of the top 2 or 3 in the United States, graphic artists.
You know, we had many offers after the show was running downtown, and to move it, the Schuberts wanted us to move it to Broadway, and thank God we never did that, because it's a mystical but very right thing, having suffered all the time and space and trying to make it work for us. We knew that it was the right thing.
How did you guys come to work on I Do, which was a musical version of the 4 poster?
Yes, it was just amazing. When Tom and I had gone to Italy, I'd rented a villa over there, but then the phone rang, but the phone had never rung. We didn't know anyone in Italy. And no one, back then you couldn't call anyone from America to Italy or vice versa. And suddenly on the phone, there was Gower Champion. And he said, I'm in David Merrick's office, and he has a very exciting potential project that he would like us to consider. And so we were both we didn't quite know what to make of it. And because we thought it's going to be very difficult to do this musical for 2 people. You know, we knew the play very well, but we were very gracious. And then when they, in the passing, the facts about it, potentially, that they wanted to get Mary Martin and Robert Preston to be in it, and my God, we suddenly thought it would be magnificent.
As we wrap up, as you look back at this point in your life on your past, do you look back as the glory days? Do you still have a lust for life and for the future?
I have 3 pieces I'm working on, 3 new pieces, and I'm very, very excited about them, and particularly the last one, which I think will probably be my last, which was a musical version of The Tempest called La Tempesta, written with Andrew Gerley, who's a great composer and is the musical director for this event, the Oscar Hammerstein thing. He's just dynamite.
Harvey, what about you? Do you still have a lust for life?
It's curious because I've had several decades of intense hospitalization, and I've just recovered recently from many months of having broken my hip. But I've never felt better than I do right now. And people tell me they feel I'm very energetic, and it's exciting. I like being alive again.
It's nice to, like to pontificate and be given awards. It kind
It's
of
lovely.
keeps you happy, keeps you smiling.
I'm so happy you guys were with us. Thank you so much and congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ride that big black Cadillac. People wonder who's in the back. 'Cause you got a wonderful way to say farewell. What a wonderful way to wave bye-bye. What a wonderful way to die. Oh, yeah, 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 yeah.
Our thanks to the Friends of Theater Talk for their significant contribution to this production. Theater Talk is made possible in part by the Frederick Lowe Foundation, the Corey and Bob Dinelli Charitable Fund, the Noel Coward Foundation, Carrie J. Fries, the Dorothy Strelson Foundation, and the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs.
We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you,